Greetings and welcome to the Introduction to Astronomy. In this week's Misconception in Astronomy, we will talk about our moon and find out if the moon is larger when it is closer to the horizon. So, does the moon appear larger when it's closer to the horizon? Well, it appears larger, but is it really larger? And the moon is not. It is actually always the same size, about half a degree in diameter. Now that will change slightly because it does have an elliptical orbit. Sometimes it's a little bit closer and appears slightly larger, which we call the supermoon, and sometimes it appears a little smaller when it's farther away, and that is the mini moon. However, this is what we call the moon illusion, which makes the moon appear larger over time. So, does the moon actually change size when it gets closer to the horizon? Well, technically it is slightly farther away from the observer, but that's only about 1%, and it would be smaller, not larger. And we can actually see this illusion photographically. Now, here's an example of that. The two circles in the center are actually the same size, but our eyes perceive them in a different manner. We perceive the upper circle, shown here, to be a little bit smaller than the one down below. But if we measured these, we'd find that they are the same size. It's by comparison to the other objects around it, and that may be part of what occurs with our moon. Now, as I said, we can see this photographically, so when we look at an image of the moon here as seen, it tends to look a lot larger when it's off over the horizon, and it can be for various different reasons, and we actually don't have a great explanation as to why this illusion occurs. But it's been known since ancient times, and in fact, Claudius Ptolemy, who devised the system that lasted for over 1,000 years to explain the motions of the planets, also talked about the moon illusion. And as of right now, it's not satisfactorily explained. So, is it because of the relative size? We're actually comparing it to other objects, and when we see it high in the sky, there is nothing else with which to compare. So, when we look at it high in the sky, there's nothing else to compare it to, and maybe that makes the difference. Or is it because of the apparent distance making it look farther away? So the apparent distance would change, and that would give us the illusion of it looking a little bit smaller when it's higher in the sky. And that's what's kind of shown here. We tend to see it as being closer, so our minds interpret that as being smaller. Now, it's really a matter of our minds playing tricks on us, that we really are trying to compare something we have no concept of. We have no idea how big the moon actually is, at least within our minds. We see it as a certain size in the sky. Yes, astronomers have it measured exactly how big it is, but we just don't have that concept really burned into our brains as we do with familiar objects here on Earth. If you see a vehicle, you have an idea of how big that vehicle is. You might have an idea of how big a tree might be. But the moon, we just don't have anything else for comparison. And that may be why the moon actually looks a little bit bigger when it is closer to the horizon. So let's go ahead and finish up with our summary. And what we've looked at today and talked about is that the moon is really roughly always the same size. It does appear larger when it's closer to the horizon, but that's just an illusion. And the exact explanation for that illusion is something that we don't know. So that concludes this week's Misconception in Astronomy on the moon being larger when it is closer to the horizon. We'll be back again next week for another Misconception in Astronomy. So until then, have a great day, everyone, and I will see you in class.